Okay, everyone. Welcome to today's Torah study. Uh, let's do the blessing before the reading of the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bakar banu mikol hamid v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who chose us from all the peoples and gave to us his Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord, the giver of the Torah. Amen. Amen. If you open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 13, I'm going to read 17 to 22. And it says, Then it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, Lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. So they took their journey from Succoth and camped at Etham, at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in the pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Now the blessing after the reading from the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah timet v'chayei olam nata botekanu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and planted everlasting life within us. Blessed are you, O Lord, the giver of the Torah. Amen. Amen. Well, you know that there is a whole lot more in this Torah than just the end of chapter 13, and we're going to get to it. Go ahead, Sharon.
You have a question already.
Yeah,
Go
I was always under the belief that the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night were one and the same pillar.
Uh-huh.
But I've read where some think they're two different pillars.
Yes.
Come
So,
on.
are you going to get into that?
Well, we're just going to get over it. So if you have something you'd like to share on that, when we get there, go ahead and share it. But I'm under the understanding that it's two separate pillars. Okay. And then, because one thing we're going to find out later on, when it separates, sunset comes, and then the instead of leading, the fire goes behind them, protecting them. So I've always felt that it was two separate. Yeah. But okay, let's get started. Beshalach, when he let go, and that's Exodus 13:17 to 17:16. That is where we're going to camp out. And you know, Lucy came up to me earlier today, and she said something very important. I think it will start doing. We'll get with our secretaries. She said in the announcements, why don't we put down the Torah portion for that week with what to read, like chapter Exodus 13:17 to Exodus 17:16, and that will give a reminder. Is that already in there? Because I didn't see it. In the bulletin? In the bulletin. So, and I told him, yeah, we could do that because we've got plenty of room there. So, so we'll make that happen.
Come on, little rascal.
Okay, let's see. All right, you guys. Okay, one thing about midrash. Does anybody know what the word midrash means? Huh? Fight. Who was that? Was that Bill? uh, it means to search out. You got it, to search out. And that's what we do here at this midrash. We search out. So even if you're zooming in, either raise your hand or Peggy's going to be monitoring the chat room. So just if you have something to share or a comment, let her know. Just like here, that's one thing we do here. If you've ever been here to our Torah study in person, we get a lot of comments, a lot of questions, which is good because that's what a midrash is all about. So I was going to get started, but Maria, use the microphone.
It's a midrash regarding this portion, and it says that it likens the Israelite to a child whose father carries him on his shoulders and fulfills his every request. Then the child asked a passer, "Have you seen my father?" Annoyed, the father says, "Don't you know where I am?" And he cast his son to the ground, where he is bitten by a dog. So, too, after all the miracles and salvation, Israel had the gall to wonder if God was with them.
Yeah.
So he cast them off.
And that fits so perfectly into this parashah. With all, well, in other words, there's with all the miracles that the children of Israel are going to see right before their very eyes, all these miracles, and then they have the nerve to complain and I mean, but then again, I guess we could even bring that into today where people are still complaining, But, well, let's get started. Thank you for sharing that, Maria. Okay, our how could I forget? Our Torah portion for this week begins with Pharaoh letting the people leave Egypt. We then see the route the Israelites are taking, or I'll put it this way, the way it says it in the Bible, the route God is going to take them. Okay, when studying the land of Canaan and its geography, we see to get to the land of their inheritance, all the Israelites had to do was go north. I mean, they're going to go a little east and then just go north, and they would be there in no time. The more direct line of traveling, the Israelites would have been at their destination in no more than 2 weeks. Some say 11 days, depending on what part of the land they were going to. If they were going to go to Shechem or wherever, but they would have been there in no time. This route was more commonly known as the Way of the Philistines. The Way of the Philistines it's a trade route. It's a route that goes quite a distance. So in Roman numeral number 1, the Israelites journey into the wilderness. The route they did take also had a name, and it was known as the Way of the Wilderness. So going north on the Way of the Philistines, this was like a well-established road. It was about 1,000-mile, if you want to call it, super highway that went along the Mediterranean Sea. A trade route for all those that are doing business, coming down into Egypt, going back up into Syria or Lebanon of today, going up to Turkey or wherever. This was a common road that they would take, and it was known as the way of the Philistines. Uh, but but also, just as there was a way going up north, just as there was a highway going north and south, there was also a highway going east and west, and that was known as the way of the wilderness. For us to think that the Israelites left Egypt and traveled with no real direction is wrong. Moses knew exactly where he was going because about 40 years earlier he left Egypt and traveled east. And this is the known road that he would have taken. What I did do right behind me is I put a little map up there. And what I have here is Egypt, present day Egypt is right here. But I want you to know that back in ancient times, Egypt didn't end right here. The Sinai Peninsula was also Egypt, let's say Egypt's territory. It might not have been the primary Egypt, but it was also an Egyptian territory. So Egypt would have gone all the way up here. And then what you see on the orange here, the lines, this is the way of the Philistines. Goes up past Gaza and just continues up. Okay, right over here, this one here is the way of the wilderness. It had a name, so to think that they aimlessly just traveled and we don't know where we're going, and I know for years I used to think that. They left Egypt and they had no idea where they're going. Yeah, but yes, this is the route that Moses would have taken, because look at what's right beyond Midian. Okay, and then he travels back. So if you could picture that, and that's why my understanding for many years was they came down this way and they crossed the Red Sea. Well, that isn't true, because if you're going to cross the Red Sea right here, you're leaving Egypt and you're going right back into Egypt. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Let me move on. I'll go back to the board in a little bit. But one other thing to note is this road, the way of the wilderness, is nowhere near the Christian understanding of Mount Sinai. Because if you have a map in your Bible, you'll see that the Christian understanding of Mount Sinai is right down here. Constantine's mother picked that spot, and she didn't consult the Jews on it. Well, Constantine was, St. Catherine's, yeah. But Constantine, being anti-Semitic that he was, he wouldn't have contacted the Jews. So go ahead, Gary. Yeah, all you do is press it up, and then start talking.
It's not.
Yeah.
Have you seen those research videos of the crossings and also of where Mount Sinai is?
Yes.
They show the place where the wadi is.
Yes.
And they actually have a pillar on one side that's still there.
Yeah.
Another pillar on the other side says basically this is where Moses crossed.
Yeah.
And then Mount Sinai, we even have a picture of the supposed rock that was split.
Yeah.
And a basin that shows a with a polished slew of stones.
Peggy,
And,
mute it. Yeah.
and Mount Sinai, where the top of it is completely scorched, and put a chain link barricade all the way around this mountain to prevent people from going up to it.
Right.
And that you can be shot if you do.
You'd be arrested, at least arrested, but you're right, you could be shot.
Those are fascinating videos.
Yeah. I've seen those videos. I don't know if in fact, I still think I have one at home. So it's one of the cassette, the old V8. Yeah.
It's on YouTube.
Oh, it is? Okay. But he's absolutely right. And there, in the pole that had the writing on it, and it was all in Hebrew. Well, what do you think the Muslims did? They got a sander or whatever, and they took off all the writing, you know. So
Still there.
what's that?
One of them's still there.
No, they have already. Oh, the pole's there, but the writing has been removed.
They took one and put it into a museum.
Oh, they did. Oh, okay.
The other one is as you say.
Okay, but yes, you know, I think what this parashah does, I think it brings it together. It brings it together exactly. You know, maybe the Catholics wouldn't like it that we're, as far as they're concerned, we're moving Mount Sinai somewhere else. But Mount Sinai was never moved. It was always there. It was always in Arabia. Yep.
No, God moved it.
But, well, you know, one thing about this is I even went to the Midrash on this study, and then I got out of it because there's just so much there that is, oh my gosh. But maybe, but like I said, but maybe that's why many Bible teachers do not agree that the people went east, but they went south of Egypt or in Egypt. Something else. Like I said, Egypt was much larger than the country it is today. I shared with you Egypt's territory went east, taking in all of the Sinai Peninsula. But before we move from chapter 13, it says in verse 19 that Moses took the bones of Joseph. The Midrash states that while the people were plundering Egypt, Moses was not. Moses was busy taking care of the promise to Joseph that that they would remove his bones when they would leave. And not to argue this point, but if we read in Genesis 50:26, it says, "So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and they embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt." So I am willing to bet that it was Joseph's mummified body that was taken and not his bones. I may be wrong, you know, but the people were busy stripping Egypt of gold, silver, and clothing, and Moses was busy taking care of Joseph's request. And not to be left in Egypt. Also in verse 18, it says in the New American Standard, "Therefore God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea. And the sons of Israel went up in battle formation from the land of Egypt." Now, if you have a complete Jewish Bible, I think it's more accurate. It says it this way. Rather, 18, we're still in verse 18. It says, "Rather, God led the people by a roundabout route through the desert by the sea of Suf. The people of Israel went up from the land of Egypt fully armed." I did too. I like that. You know, and I had a conversation with a person, and he said, well, no, they had to have gone down like this and around, because that's a roundabout way. I said, but wait a minute, where were they eventually going to go? To the promised land. So even if they went this way, it's a roundabout way. Okay, but okay, now let me see where I'm at. In letter A, God leads the people east, a much longer journey to the promised land. And in letter B, the Israelites plundered Egypt of its wealth. Okay, the Sea of Suf. And it could either be Suf, S-U-F, or S-U-P. But the Sea of Suf is called the Red Sea in the Greek translation. But in the Hebrew, Yam means sea, and Suf means reeds, reeds. So more accurately, it is the Sea of Reeds. And that's letter C. Yam Suf equals the Sea of Reeds. Now let me get into something here. In addition, the New American Standard says that the sons of Israel went up in battle formation. They may have. Where the complete Jewish Bible says the people of Israel went up from the land of Egypt fully armed. The Hebrew word used here for battle formation and fully armed is the word hamushim. That's, I think did I write it in there? Okay, there it is, hamushim. Rashi gives two explanations. He says that the people left armed for battle. And then his second explanation is, however, okay, he says that they armed for battle. I'll finish this thought first and then okay. However, we just read in verse 17 that God thought that the people, upon seeing war, might change their minds and return to Egypt. I don't know if they were fully armed for battle. So I do not know if they were armed for battle. Rashi's second explanation is a play on the word hamushim. He explains that the word hamushim derived from the root word hamisha, which means 5. And I saw a couple different writing or spellings on this, but isn't that the way it is? I mean, look at Hanukkah. How many different spellings on that? But
That's the Hebrew word 4-5.
4-5. He is indicating here that only 1/5 of the Israelite population actually left Egypt. Were you going to say something now, Sharon?
No.
Okay. All right. The remaining 4/5 died in the 9th plague. Does everybody remember what the 9th plague was? The plague of darkness. Right. The plague of darkness. And the Midrash explains, and that's the way the Midrash explains it. But I say, really? When the Lord struck Egypt with total darkness, there was light in Goshen, where the Israelites lived. But Rashi says the majority who were unwilling to assume a Torah lifestyle refused to leave, and thus perished during the plague of darkness, so that the Egyptians would not witness their death. Now, if there was roughly maybe I'm just going to put a figure out there, 2 million people who left Egypt, and that was only 1/5. 8 million people died, and the Egyptians wouldn't have known it. He says that they were so assimilated that they had gotten used to the Egyptian lifestyle and figured, why should they leave? You know, that's a little bit on even in Germany, when many of the people were told to leave and go back to the land. It wasn't Israel yet, but to go back into the land, they wouldn't leave. Hey, I've got my business here, I've got this, and and I wonder how much of that would go on now, because there's a lot of people here. I used to always tell Peggy, I'd love to move to Israel, but then, and she would go with me just because I'm the boss.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. No, but even today, there's a lot of people. They don't want, a lot of Jews. They don't want to make Aliyah. They have no desire to go to Israel. So, I hope the same thing that happened in Germany doesn't happen again, because that's probably going to be their safest place. let Paul go first. Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
Yeah, well, I think I'm on. All right.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, okay. Basically, what we're looking at is a pattern, and the pattern follows right through to today.
Yes.
How many Jews are going to accept what God says they have to accept in order to draw near to Him?
Yes.
And that's through Yeshua.
Amen.
So, when we talk about, is this pattern going to be repeated? What percentage of the Jews are going to receive Him? What percentage are not? And are they going to be lost in the plagues?
Yeah.
Whatever the plagues turn out to be.
No, I agree with you, and I see the pattern, and the pattern is even going today. Go ahead, Colette.
Yeah, I was going to say a little bit about that pattern. When Zerubbabel, that first group that left Babylon to go back to the land, there was a remnant. And it seems like that's always been the pattern, is a remnant, there's a remnant.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you remember when we went to go see the rabbi in Redlands, when he was talking about making Aliyah, and he was in a group with all the Ethiopians.
Yes.
Yes, and then he was saying how he had made his rounds in New York trying to get more Jews to do Aliyah.
That's right. I completely forgot about that.
It's like he couldn't like make any headway, and he was trying to like reason or whatever. I was thinking about him the other day because the other day I read something, I don't know if it's true or not, I'm still researching it out, whether or not it's flipped, because before there was more Jews in New York than there were in Israel. But I think somebody told me that statistic has just flipped.
Yeah.
That there's actually more people making Aliyah now, and maybe that's a breaking of that pattern. I'm still searching it out to see whether or not that's the case, but that would be kind of like an end times indication that something might be going on right now for people really to see that there's value in it. Also, more secular Jews are becoming religious.
I hope you're right.
Well, that's been a pattern that they're just done. If you look at this guy named Beryl, if you look him up on YouTube, he has a channel, but he made a movie, it's called Orthodox.
Right.
Where he was like your typical total secular Jew until he just gives his whole story, like why he's Lubavitch now.
Yeah. Well, I shared a comment with Peggy, was it yesterday, hon? When I told her, I said, look what this Jew is writing. And she says, what? And I said, the Jew says she says, I pray for the Jews that are voting for anti-Semitic governments like in England, in America, and he even mentioned the American Democratic Party. He says, because when the Mashiach comes, he says, they are going to be judged and they will not enter in, And this was a Jew that was saying that. Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, where does it say there's going to come a time when all Israel will be saved? And it'll be like in an instant.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if the judgment comes before and then whoever's left is the remnant.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, you hit on something really good there because it says all, and later on we're going to read something where again it says all the people, I don't know. I wonder, who changed all? I think we did. all man did, all used to mean 100%. I think now all means just above 50%, 51, but with they, yeah. But we're talking about the pattern, and I really think there's a pattern there, and I haven't done a study on it, but in Babylon, I do know majority of the people stayed in Babylon. So I wonder if it was only 1/5 of the people that went back to Jerusalem, back to build the walls again, build the city. But it may, the pattern may still exist, and it can happen again. Okay, on the contrary, let's see. Now that they were free, they wished to stay and live in Egypt, it says, as free citizens. They felt there was no need to make an effort, go through the wilderness on a long journey to a land that they knew little about. And these were the 4/5 that decided to stay back in Egypt, at least the way it's written. The Lord saw this as a lack of appreciation, and it was a decision that caused their demise. They chose to be like the Egyptians, and therefore they were punished together with the Egyptians. 4/5 of the Israelites perished, and only 1/5 of the people came out of Egypt. And this is what we read in the Midrash. The Humash mentions it just briefly, but if we are to ask ourselves, taken at face value, this Midrash is it's hard to believe. Did only 1/5 of the Jewish people really leave Egypt, while all the rest perished? There is no record, and I couldn't find anything on it. There is no record in the Torah of such a disaster. We know about what happened in Germany. We know what happened at Masada is basically it's not factual yet, but we know something happened there. But we know a lot of this information. But for this to happen, 4/5 of the people to be killed, that's a massive loss there. We will not go, go ahead, Pastor Bruce.
By the time the Septuagint was written in about 250 years before Messiah came, Alexandria in Egypt
Yes.
had probably the largest concentration of Jews in the world. And so you have to ask yourself, where
Where'd
they
they
all left Egypt, then a huge amount went back. But probably the reality is these are the descendants of the people that never left Egypt.
Yep, exactly. And the other thing is, we're not going to go there today, but there is an understanding with some Jewish scholars that it wasn't just 1/5. That play on that word, it could be 1 in 50 left, and even one, and then there's even an understanding 1 in 500 left. So that's for another day. But then there is an understanding about the 1/5 that left Egypt. From Jacob to Moses is calculated as 5 generations. Now listen here. When the Israelites left Egypt, they realized that only 1/5 of all the generations of Hebrews in Egypt were leaving. They were the blessed generation. There is reason to believe that all of the Israelites did leave Egypt, those that were alive at that time. So turn into Exodus 12 in verse 50 and 51. And what it says in Exodus 12, 50, 51, it says, all the people of Israel did just as Adonai had ordered Moshe and Aaron. On that very day, Adonai brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their divisions. So, according to this reading, all the people, they all heard, they all did what they were supposed to do, and when God said, come on, let's go, they got up and they left. So the important word here is all. I do think that every Israelite alive, along with the mixed multitude, left Egypt. Over 2 million, and then that is also debatable. They have figures of up to 6 million people leaving, and as low as 30,000. So it's all over the board. But if you figure, we know for a fact that it was 660,000 men? Or 600, let's say 600,000 men. And if they were all married, because then
I figure 3 million. But
that's 12, yeah. And they're not like Americans having 2.1 children, They may have had 5 children plus. So we're getting, our figures now are really up there, you know.
Only counted from 20 to 50.
Yeah.
They could have been.
On both sides, yeah, yeah. But it was 600,000 men. So, like I said, I'm just putting a conservative figure out there, and I say 2 million, but I'm probably so far off, you know. So like I said, yes, go use the mic. Yeah.
It occurred to me that everybody talks about the Israelites that left, but nobody counts a single one of the foreigners that left.
Yeah.
So it could be a lot higher.
It could be, that's what I'm saying. It could be a lot higher, you know. And then, you know, when we start getting into some of the future parashahs, you're going to see that any time that the Israelites did something wrong, it was a mixed multitude. So.
That's why they took them away.
We have somebody to blame. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. You know, we're not even factoring in the mixed multitude, and we do know that when Joshua brought the people across the Jordan finally, it states there that he brought in, you know, the Israelites plus a mixed multitude. So there was still people that were attached to the Lord. Go ahead, Maria.
When I came to that part, 600,000 fighting men. According to Josephus, the army that the Pharaoh had was 250,000 plus the 600 chariots.
Yes.
What were they afraid of? I mean, they outnumbered, you know, then I thought, well, maybe they didn't know how to fight. But I remembered a story that Carol told us in one of our studies, that Egypt went to war with Ethiopia and they were losing, so they sent message to the Jewish nation in Egypt, send us your men. Only 150 showed up. And the Egyptians were mad. Yeah, we're fighting a war here and you send 150? Well, they sent the Jewish men in, and like David, when they were in the middle of the battle, they withdrew from the Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
Well, God has his sense of humor.
Yeah.
They won. They killed all the enemy.
Right.
And they didn't lose a man.
Right.
Meanwhile, the Egyptians saw that and they took off. The Hebrews caught up with them, killed 4,000. This is 150.
Yep.
And I'm thinking 600,000 fighting men against 250. What were they afraid of?
Right. Yep.
Maybe they didn't know how to fight, but you said here they were armed.
Yep.
But later on where it says, and it reminded me of Pastor Bruce, where it says, Moses told them, do not fear, stand firm.
How many times did he tell them, do not fear?
They never did.
Yeah.
They never
So.
listened.
Was there another hand up?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
Well, the thing is that when they left Egypt, they may have had up to 3 million people, but they had been slaves. They weren't used to fighting the military, so it would be just like anyone in this room. I don't know how many military people there are, but you're not in the tip-top shape that you were when you were in the military. So it would be us going up against trained military, and it would be them going up against trained military. So it doesn't matter how many people they had, they were still going up against trained military.
We all carried blocks.
But
What?
then we remember World War II, the resistance, who was fighting and knocking down bridges and railroad? Children. women, they had no training.
Right. No, that's right. Well, we got to remember Moses was over 100 years old when he took out one of the giants. So, you know, don't hold all us senior citizens down in here.
Whatever we do, we have to do quickly.
Yeah.
Maria has a
Talking
point
to the whole
because when we fought the American Revolution, it was mostly guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
And the Maccabees.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Okay. So what I was pointing out there. So their understanding is this 1/5 with the wordplay there. That yes, 1/5 of the people came out. It was all the Israelites, if you include everyone that had gone down from the original, was it 70, that had gone down all the way up to the time they left Egypt, being the 5th generation. 4 generations have already died off, and this last generation being the last, was being 1/5. So that's what one of the understandings. Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
I just want to remind us all, Israel has never won a war of any size on its own. Every war that they've ever won is because God has rejected himself.
You are absolutely
Even modern
right.
wars.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
you talk to the people on the battlefield and all of that, and it's always like, we had 100 tanks, they had 2,000, we whipped them.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. And you know, even when they went into to take the city of Jerusalem, they would not fire any cannons or anything like that because they did not want to destroy, you know, these great walls and everything. The Muslims could care less, you know. But even with the rifles that they had and the hand-to-hand battle and everything like that, they defeated them. And I agree with you. I don't think there's ever a war that the Israelites won because of their great might, or it's all because of the Lord, you know. And you know, one great thing is they always give thanks to the Lord. So, all right. Now the people camped in 2 places when they left Egypt. First at Sukkot and then at Etham. Now I just want you to know, these were not 2 famous campgrounds. The names were given to these places when the Israelites arrived there. You know, I know we see maps and it'll say Sukkot or something like that. It wasn't called Sukkot back in the time of the Egyptians, of Pharaoh's rule. You know, once they stopped, then they started giving them names. And we're going to see that throughout their travels in the wilderness. Most of the places, not all, but most of the places that they stopped at, they gave names to. Okay. So in letter D, Hamushim equals armed for battle. Hamisha equals 5. And then in letter E, over 2 million plus the mixed multitude left Egypt. And like I say, that's a debate for another day, but I think we probably, if I asked all of you, you'll probably all have a different answer. 6 million, 4 million, I think it's very interesting, even with what Kathy says, that we always take into consideration the Israelites who left, and we don't even count the mixed multitude. And they were part of the group. So in chapter 14, it begins with the Lord telling Moses to turn back and have the people camp at a place called Paharoth, which could mean mouth of the gorge or the mouth of the channel. What we read here in chapter 14 is the Israelites were headed in one direction, and then they are stopped and they backtracked to go a different direction. I don't think that, like I told you already, I've told you, I don't believe this is the route they took. I believe that God, through Moses, through God, was taking the people across this way. Well, one thing, if you look at an ancient map of Egypt, you'll see these roads, the way of the Philistines, the way of the wilderness. So my guess would be he may have had the people all the way up to here, and then the Lord said, no, backtrack. So he backtracked, and then he took the road that led right down to the Sea of Aqaba. Well, Aqaba is what it's called today, but this would be the Sea of Reeds. Okay, go ahead, Tila.
Well, you know, I was looking at this last night, and the Brown driver in Biggs says that word means place of where the sledge grows. Now this is kind of off the subject, but it's a miry muck. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And isn't that where we in our relationship begins, in the miry muck, and God leads us? And I mean, it was just a thought, but I'd like.
No, that's a good thought.
Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
Vince,
One thing I found out too in this
teaching.
Yom Suf, it could also mean, what is it, papyrus, or is that how you say it? Papyrus, yeah, papyrus? Yeah. Yeah.
Vince,
So,
Ken is trying to get your attention.
who is trying to?
Kent.
I don't even see Kent there. Go ahead, Kent, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I could hear you loud and clear.
Great. Just for the sake of history, many Jews immigrated before Hitler took control. I mean, before the Second World War, European Jews immigrated to Egypt. I mean, they are as white as Poles, as people from Poland, and they're from Poland. A lot of them speak Yiddish, but the main language they speak is French. And they live in Egypt or lived in Egypt, and then most of them immigrated to Israel. They were kind of elitish living in Egypt. And when I was there, they were all over Israel speaking French, speaking English,
Right.
and they were from Egypt. I just want to mention that. So, that was an immigration of Jews that went to Egypt. I don't know if the British let them in or it was the only country they could get into, because America, remember, didn't let a lot of people in.
Well, and I mean, I don't know the relationship between Israel and Egypt at that time, but I think it's always hasn't been a great relationship. The hostility between Egypt to Israel is really bad now, but back in that time, back in the 60s or 70s.
It was British rule.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Right.
So that's right. Yeah. Because I think about it right now. Would I want to go live in Russia? I don't think so. North Korea? No. There's
Cuba.
You're right. I would not want to. So, I don't know why the Jews would want to go to Egypt, the Middle East, outside of Israel. They haven't, and they haven't made here in America, but
The British didn't let them in. The British didn't let
okay.
them in. That's why.
All right, thank you, Kent. I'm willing to believe, like I was showing you right here, that the Israelites were very near the border of Egypt and maybe the land of Midian. They were, they were very close, but the Lord had something else on his mind, or something else he wanted to do. So that's when he turned them around and had them, go a different route. God was not done with Egypt, and that is why the Lord told Moses to go a different route. God would be glorified through Pharaoh, and all of Egypt would know that the God of the Hebrews was the most powerful God. So now, depending on how long the people were traveling, have you ever thought, how did Pharaoh know exactly where they were as they were traveling, as people might think, aimlessly through the wilderness? You know, they're just going in a direction. How would he know they were there? Spies? How about, yeah, blame it on the mixed multitude. How about this?
It's always them.
How about this? If this was all Egypt, wouldn't Pharaoh have maybe an outpost here, an outpost there, maybe something up here, and even along the way of the wilderness, an outpost here, an outpost there, you know, and they would send messages back to Pharaoh. You know, the people are over here now, or the people are over there. So he knew exactly in which direction they were going. So when he took off after them, you know, he knew where to go.
How about if we're just simple people and we realize we got 2 million people on.
Hey, I had that written down. So go ahead. You know, how are you going to hide 2 to 6 million people? You think they're going to leave a trail?
Right.
You know, if 5 homeless people can leave all their garbage behind, and you know they were there, 2 million people. So, you know, the fact that ancient Sinai was Egyptian territory, Pharaoh, like I said, would have had an outpost everywhere. But like we were just saying, you can't hide 2 million people. So as Moses was once again traveling the road he took 40 years earlier, they must have put a pretty good distance, and that's what it is. They put a pretty good distance between the Hebrews and Pharaoh's army. But by turning back and going in another direction, it made it much easier for Pharaoh to catch up to them. Okay? Why did God give them a cloud by day and a fire by night? Okay? Because there's some people that, well, the cloud, the fire was so at night they slept comfortably and you know, they can relax or whatever. No. They had fire by night so they could travel by night. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about God's ride. If you think your Lamborghini is cool, go to Ezekiel Chapter One. Those of you that have been around here for years. But if you let me read a few verses here, it might help us figure out this torch deal.
Okay.
So Ezekiel, I'll start in...
Chapter 1?
Yeah, Chapter 1.
If you're listening in and you have your Bible with you, go to Ezekiel Chapter 1.
And I'm going to read it fast, so
Okay.
it don't take too much time. As I looked, behold, a storm came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it. And the flashing forth continually in the midst of the fires that were gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces, each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings on the 4 sides they had hands like humans, and the 4 had the faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another, each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had a face of a lion on the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and on it goes to the eagle. Such were their faces, and their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of the wings touched one another, while 2 covered and each went straight forward. Whenever the spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches moving to and fro among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. And the creatures darted back and forth. They also had wheels. It talks later about wheels within the wheels. This is a machine, not and a living machine, however you want to cover it. And then later on, it talks about the sea of, over their heads was the likeness of a throne and appearance of sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance. And it goes on to describe, God's dealings with Ezekiel. And this chariot took Ezekiel up, took him someplace, put him down. He talks about it in chapter 10 again.
Right.
It's revisited in Revelation. One of my pet peeves, which Sharon's always pushing me against. These aren't angels. In Revelation chapter 4, it says surrounding the thrones were angels. I didn't bring my glasses. Surrounding the throne were 24 living thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings and peals of thunder. Before the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. And it differentiates the angels, the living creatures, and the 24 elders.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what was with the Israelites.
Uh-huh.
God's presence in his chariot.
Well,
I know that sounds weird, but he rode a donkey when he was on earth.
Yeah. No, I don't, I'm not going to debate that because you hit it right on the head. I mean, what we do know is, you had women and children, you had elderly, and they had to get from one place to the other. Now, if he kept the shoes on their feet from not deteriorating for 40 years, I mean, maybe their knees and everything else were, they're walking like an 18-year-old, these 60-year-old people. I don't know. But I could see, I mean, what you mentioned.
My point is the cherubim was, I believe, that object that's being described as a torch at night.
At night?
Because at night it's going to glow more.
Right. You don't think it was just a fire?
No. Because it was God's presence and it was terrifying and it kept him separate from the Israelites.
Well, I know it was terrifying once the Egyptians caught up to them.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Maria, use your microphone, please. Now, who's taking Maria's microphone?
Well, like Sharon, when I came to this, I never saw it before because I always thought, and everything I have read said that the cloud would change and it become fire at night, and then during the day it would change, and I always thought it was one.
Right.
Until I read this, where it says, "Thus the one did not come near the other."
Right.
So there were 2. And then I remembered Genesis 15, where God came down to the sacrifice of Abraham, and he became, one of them was a cloud.
Right.
The other one was a torch of fire.
Yep.
So I thought, the Father was in the front, Yeshua was protecting them in the back, and then the wind that blew was the Ruach HaKodesh. So all 3 of the Godhead was there with the children of Israel when they crossed.
Yeah. No, that's a good picture, Yeah, but it's a good picture,
That's the only picture. No.
Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
Yeah, we have a lot of analogies.
Yeah.
One of the things we have to recognize, and every Christian wants to bring Yeshua into every appearance of any spiritual being that ever existed. And the truth of the matter is, that is not true. Yeshua was a very unique individual that God knew from the beginning, just like he knows you and me. Before the foundation of the earth was established, God knew Yeshua. But Yeshua was actually born at a point in time, very specifically at a point in time, so he could be a human being. And then if you follow that through, we follow the whole process. You go to Acts chapter 7, verse 38, I think it is. And you find out very clearly that who was it that gave the Torah to Israel? Who was it that was leading Israel? Who was it that was here? You know, it's talking about the Lord, and it uses Yahweh.
Yeah.
Who was it? It was an angel of God providing the Torah for Israel. They did everything for God in His name.
Right.
We're called to be ambassadors of Messiah. The angelic host fulfilled all of that business right up until Yeshua was born, and even while he was still living, it was angels that ministered to him in every aspect
Right.
of his walk and life.
You know, the rabbis even say that. They say that it was the angel of God, it wasn't the Mashiach. So you're right.
And so, you know, at the time, and this is where it gets really important. At the resurrection of Yeshua, at that point, and when the Father said to his beloved Son, sit, sit with me, at that point he says, today I have begotten you. Begotten is a very interesting word, very, very important for us to know. All the genealogies go like, you know, Joseph begot so-and-so, and somebody
Right.
else begot so-and-so. When you beget anything, you reproduce what you are. In other words, humans beget humans. We can make all kinds of things, but we only beget other humans. When God begets, what does He beget? He begets God. And when he said, you are my begotten Son, He took Yeshua, and right at that point when He seats Him in the throne, He says to you, O God. And He's talking about Yahweh. Yahweh is speaking to Yeshua, and He's saying, you, Yahweh. There was a transference there that will never change. And we go to the book of Revelation, we go, what's that about? It's totally about Yeshua.
Mm-hmm.
The prayers, like when we pray to the Father in Yeshua's name. A lot of people
Right.
do that. When you read the book of Revelation, who do the angels bring the prayers to? Not to the Father. They bring them to Yeshua. And the transition we have to get
Right.
is that God knew all of this, and He was working toward this in this total summation of who Yeshua is today. He literally is God.
Yeah.
And the Father has established Him as God who will be forever God.
Yeah.
Now, Scripture says no man has ever seen God. That holds true in the aspect of the Father as we have understood Him. But now through Yeshua, God has revealed Himself. He said, this is God. You sit in the throne. You rule. You take everything. He was the firstborn. The firstborn gets how much of the Father's wealth?
Yeah.
Double portion of it, whatever it amounts to. You know, and we try to bring Yeshua into all this, and it's fine because it represents Yeshua. It certainly does. But it's the angel of God working on behalf of the Father. And so when we see angel of the Lord, an angel of the Lord, an angel of the Lord, people try to say, oh, that's Yeshua, that's Yeshua. Remember this about the prodigal, this very simple thing. When Abram came back from defeating the kings, he came back, and Scripture says that Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek because Levi was still in the loins of his father, of Abraham. Think of the loins of God Himself. Was Yeshua alive within the Father? That story is not just there for no reason. That story is there so we can see a bigger picture. The Father has known you. He knew Yeshua. He knew what was going to happen. And before Yeshua lived, the Father already knew Him and had already established what He was going to do. So in the loins of God Himself, Yeshua was already identified as the Son. Just a thought, just
It,
something.
oh, no, it's a good thought. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm not worthy.
Put on Sharon's glasses so you can read.
I'm not worthy to carry your notes, but I respectfully disagree. Hebrews chapter 1:6 says, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. But about the Son, he says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. And that's the big G word for God. I can't remember, Theos. And so it's weird, but can God take on human form? But, you know, I think Yeshua, it also talks, I have a real simple test, and I've been slammed for it a couple times, but the Torah says worship no one but God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Yeshua in his earthly walk accepted worship twice that I can recall, the last verse in Luke, and I can't remember where the other one was. And then here God's telling his angels to worship him.
Worship, yeah.
So, yeah, I have trouble with the spiritual part of it, how to explain all that. But the angel that the commander of the Lord's army in Joshua, he accepted worship.
Mm-hmm.
So how can there be? You can't worship anybody but God. These are big.
Yeah.
These are big people we're talking about. The
No, you're right.
Exodus 3,
You're right.
the burning bush. Take your shoes off. Take your sandals off.
Right.
So how he got from there as the second person of the Trinity walking the earth, if that's what you want to call him, or the, I don't know how he got from there to Yeshua.
Verse 5, Bill.
And
Mm-hmm.
well,
For to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son, today I have begotten you? He's saying that to Yeshua.
Yeah, but
but he's telling him to worship him, and I'm saying there's another God,
yeah.
a fourth one, because there's that angel of the Lord accepted worship in violation of Torah several times through the
Right.
Old Testament.
Right. No, I know what you're saying.
We don't have to
So-
agree on this.
No, and that's good. I mean, that's what a midrash is all about, you guys. Go ahead, Gary, and then we'll move on.
A lot of the Second Temple and pre-Second Temple use on deity, monotheism versus polytheism, and a lot of the rabbi, it's an explanation that, you got God the Father, God the Son. They are different, yet they are the same. But all of these appearances, from walking in the garden to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah when angels appeared unto Abraham, all of these times with Joshua, these are all pre-incarnate appearances of Yahweh in the form of his son. When Moses talked to God, they talked face to face like friends.
Right.
Now you can't do that with quote unquote God, but you can do that with Yeshua. And he was crucified before the foundations of the world, so we got to take in or let go of our limited understanding of linear time.
Right, right.
And so it explains a lot of, all of those appearances was Christ himself, but yet he appears technically before he was born.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that confuses a lot of us.
Right, right.
So.
Well, and that's good because, you're right. I mean, the burning bush, was it God magnified through a burning bush?
Even with the cloud of...
The cloud of fire.
We're still talking about the same kind of appearance.
Right.
See, the thing about this is makes it really simple, is that God can manifest whatever way he needs to manifest
Yes.
in order to accomplish his goal.
Yeah.
And was he representing Messiah? Absolutely, through the angel of the Lord, through all of the appearances, because he's preparing the people for what needs to transpire.
Right.
So by the time you get to Hebrews, which Hebrews is all about the transference from God the Father being separate from the Son to them being one,
Mm-hmm.
the plurality of the Godhead, which we talk about as the Trinity. See, when people start defending the Trinity, you have a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Trinity has never been a doctrine that came from the beginning. The Trinity is something that developed through Christianity,
Right.
and through the Roman Catholic perspective. So when we start defending it, we really get into slippery slopes and pretty shallow ice, let's put it
Right.
that way.
Okay, I was going to move on, but go ahead, Sharon.
I'm just gonna add a little fuel to this fire.
It's all right. It's all right.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And then later on it says, but all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of a man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth.
I almost thought of that.
No, I was thinking of that too. I was thinking in Genesis, and you're right. So, but you know what? We were talking about the fire by night, and and we're going to get back there. It was there to keep the people moving. So initially, and you know what? Do you recall what Moses initially asked Pharaoh in the beginning when he went back into Egypt? He said, "Let my people go into the wilderness for 3 days." It was not going to be a 3-day trip anymore. God was not going to let the people go back to Egypt. He was removing them from Egypt for good. I was listening to a rabbi over the weekend, and he was talking about this parashah. And he was saying, basically, Moses was lying to Pharaoh. He lied to him. Let my people go out into the desert for 3 days, when he knew all along that he was going to take his people out and get out of Dodge. So, so that's what this person was saying. So we do know here in chapter 14 that the Israelites are cornered with water on one side, and the Egyptian army the only other outlet. One thing about this road that I put up here, this road is going to take them right down to the Gulf there, and there's mountain terrain on one side, and then on the other side, you either had the water or you had the army, and that was it. There was really nowhere to escape unless they were Olympic swimmers and they can get across. And there's an idea there that it was about an 8-mile crossing. It wasn't like in a Charleston Heston movie, getting them out there and across in 1 hour. This was an all-night journey to get all the people across to the other side. But there was no other way to escape. That is why the people cried out to Moses, "You brought us into the wilderness to die? They said, let us return to Egypt and be slaves." I do not think Pharaoh wanted, and right here, because we're thinking that, here's the Egyptian army, they're going to go in there and they're going to destroy the Israelites. No, I don't think so. I think their goal was to get the people back to serve him as slaves. He probably would have wanted to kill Moses and all the leaders, but majority of the people, they just wanted them back to be slaves again. And then it also says that every chariot in Pharaoh's arsenal was there going after the Israelites. So he had soldiers or people on foot as well as all the chariots. At this point, the cloud and the fire, the cloud that was ahead of them, and the fire, now that the Pharaoh had caught up to the people, the Israelites, they were right there. the Egyptians were just so far away, something had to happen. So what the Lord did is he got it had to be around sunset. So the Lord got the fire. The fire now, instead of leading the people, went behind them to protect them. Okay, so here is a picture of God leading his people, being in front, and also protecting his people by standing behind them. Okay, in verse 20 of chapter 14, the hedge of protection around Israel is giving light to the Israelites, but it's total darkness on the Egyptian side. And the word there that used in Hebrew is the same word for darkness in the 9th plague. So it was a pitch black night on the side of the Egyptians.
Well, the darkness and the light didn't come near each other.
No, well, but it was like a wall,
No,
and
I
that's
know.
the way I
That's what I'm
picture it.
saying. Then, excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead, Pastor Paul.
The nature of light is to shine.
Right.
It has to shine. And light pierces the darkness. But yet in this case, the light and the darkness were there, and they were
Yeah.
still separate.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Sharon, go ahead.
Well, the darkness, we talked last week. Sorry.
It's okay.
We talked last week about Choshech and that it was dark matter.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know there's dark energy. I have a question about that. Anybody that's into that?
And you're saying Hoshek. That's the same word that is being used here as in the 9th plague.
Yeah, and so that's, in my belief, I think that was dark matter because it's not naturally occurring on this planet. I think it was a supernatural darkness that God caused, and light couldn't penetrate it.
Right.
So that's totally different physical attributes to this darkness
Right.
than the one that is natural on earth.
Right.
So if that was indeed dark matter, Hoshek, the Egyptians would have been just paralyzed.
Right.
They couldn't, see or do anything. So,
When I read this, what it reminds me of is the story of Masada. If you remember the story of Masada, and you could read it in Josephus, but when the Romans were ready to take their final siege over Masada, sunset had come, or it started getting dark. So they just retreated because they knew the very next day that they were going to break through, and even the Israelites that were up on Masada, they knew it too. They knew that, then that's it. They battled as long as they could, but and they couldn't go any further. Well, this reminds me of it as with Pharaoh. Even though there was a dark matter or darkness, Pharaoh already knew that as soon as daylight would come in the morning, they are dust. He's just going to go in, do what he needs to do, take all the people back. So I don't even know. I would picture him probably as dark as it is, just sitting in his chariot, hollering in the dark for all his soldiers, just stay calm. When the morning comes, we'll take care of business. So
Can I say something?
wait, let me finish this thought. Pharaoh was, like I said, was probably relaxing in his chariot, waiting for daylight. I wonder if the same thing is going to happen at Armageddon, when all the armies of the world gather to destroy Israel. Will there be a total darkness? And then light comes in the form of the Mashiach to destroy all the armies that came up against Israel. Okay, Maria first.
But isn't it a rule that most armies do not fight at night?
Not anymore.
Not anymore, yeah.
Well, the Indians didn't do it. The spirit could not find the shadow land
That's
Yeah.
if they died.
I hated those night vision goggles. They were.
They didn't get them. Custom
Okay.
didn't give it out.
Pastor Paul?
Okay. See, we like to concentrate on the darkness as being supernatural, but let's also not forget that the light was supernatural as well. You see, the Egyptians are looking for the natural light to come, and yet Israel is following. Why did they need to follow the cloud during the day and have the fire at night? We say, oh, so they could see. Well, that's maybe. But if there was supernatural darkness there that could not be penetrated, and there was light there, and they would not mix with each other, you got two different things going on. And, you know, we have to recognize that when God's doing this stuff, He does it according to His order.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, and letter F, led by a cloud during the day, fire by night. See, that's one thing we have to understand. They were led. People were moving day and night. G, Moses had traveled this road before. Letter H, God turns the people around and backtracks, taking them to the west side of the Sea of Reeds. So the fill-ins are backtracks and west. And then in letter I, Pharaoh is in hot pursuit of the Israelites. And I don't know if you've read where it's, you know, it's the understanding there is Pharaoh got his own chariot and everything ready. He was so upset with what he had done. He didn't have his slaves or Egyptian slaves or whatever get it ready for him. He did it himself because he wanted it done quickly, and let's get after him. So just wanted to throw that in there. You know, I am convinced that the Israelites were backed up to what is present day the Gulf of Aqaba. God had Moses lift up his staff just as he did in Pharaoh's court. The waters parted, it says a strong east wind that lasted all night. And it held up two walls of water, one to the right of the people and one to the left. And I didn't find anywhere there where it says how wide that was. To get that many people across, I don't think it was 20 feet wide. It's not like going to Hollywood studios, you know, and you take the tram right through the water, you know. But it may have been about a half mile wide, maybe a mile wide. Who knows, you know. But one thing I do know is, you know, is like I said, not only all the people, 2 million people, also all their animals and wagons and everything, they all went across, and it tells us they went across on dried land. I mean, how many miracles?
Not muddy, that's really
not muddy, exactly. I mean, how many miracles do the people have to see? And they're just getting started, you know. So go ahead, Gary.
In those videos I spoke of earlier, there's also, it went underwater with the cameras, and they still have coral formations in the shape of chariots and wheels and things spread on the floor. And there is a natural ramp from one side to the other.
That's from outer space. They have taken some pictures from outer space of that area, and you can see a natural path going across. Yeah, it's like it looks like a bridge. Go ahead, Maria.
That was, I think, one of the miracles that God performed. They crossed on dry land, but when the Egyptians went to go across, some of the Midrash says the wheels came off the chariots,
Right.
and some of the wheels were locked in the mud.
Yep.
They sank in mud. So when the Israelites crossed on dry, the Egyptians, the land all of a sudden became wet.
Right. Absolutely. You know, one miracle after another, and and with all these miracles, there's no way the people will ever complain again, right? Yeah. No, exactly. The last person gets across, and now the darkness is lifted over the Egyptians. The Egyptian armies are now in hot pursuit of Israel. So they decide we're going to go in. You know, if the people can go in, you think that the Pharaoh would have had maybe a half a brain and said, you know what, I give up. We're going back, you know. Your God is greater than any God we've ever existed. One of the studies say that this was the last God, small g, that
Balls up on.
yeah, that had to be destroyed, and then all of them were destroyed by the God of the Hebrews. Okay, so the waters come crashing down, and every Egyptian is killed. We are not told that Pharaoh died here, but in Egyptian historical documents during the supposed time of the Exodus, it says that the Pharaoh had died. It doesn't say how he died, but it does say during that time the Pharaoh had died. And that is what the documents say, that the society there in Egypt collapsed. So we can make the assumption that he did die in the parting of the waters, and the waters coming back upon them. Now, who is it?
It's Bonnie.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, this is just food for thought, and I'm not saying this is real or not, but I just watched a documentary a couple of nights ago, and it was talking about how the people went through on dry land. But one of the things it was saying that instead of the water crashing over, you know, the walls of water, they could have actually just come down from the bottom and, you know, drowned Pharaoh's army.
You know, the other thing I read, Bonnie, was when the water came crashing down, it came down like a ton of bricks. That it was as though rocks or boulders hit these people and just killed them instantly. So, you know, there's different methods, but we do know there was one understanding that they died in 2 feet of water. Now, now that really would have been a miracle. So, Pastor Bruce?
The word in Hebrew here, koma, I've studied that, and there's some teachers teach that can also be translated as ice. It's the word for wall. The waters became like a wall.
Yeah.
And they've translated it so that it became ice. So when we talk about come crashing down,
right,
it's very possible that it was like boulders coming down on them too.
Yeah. It killed them instantly. So, you know, think about it. Pharaoh, I'll get to you right now, Sharon. Pharaoh is dead. Okay, his firstborn son died in the 10th plague, and it says all of his Pharaoh's military leaders on their chariots were there. So all of them had died there in the Sea of Reeds. So now about half the population is gone, and Egypt, it says, wouldn't be heard from for at least about another 200 to 300 years. So, you know, I could see that why Egypt would have had a total collapse. Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, I don't know the timeline, but
Yeah.
there was a pharaoh that was raised up who was a theist, believed in only one God. And he, is that what his name is? I don't know. And he changed the seat of power and he moved it. And I think that lasted for his lifetime, but then Egypt went back to multiple gods. And so you wonder, was that a man that saw what happened?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, why would he all of a sudden be a theist? You know?
Right. Well, they say that all the nations of that time knew exactly what had happened. And they trembled with the sight of all these people. And why would they fear the Israelites? Because they knew they were coming. You know, they're going to come into, and what are they going to do when they get into their land? You know, later on when we hit some of the other parashahs, we'll see that there was two nations that they didn't have to tremble because the Israelites weren't going to do anything to them. They were just going to pass through. But they decided to go to war against Israel anyway. So and I was going to say that you know, every nation at that time in the Middle East heard about the God of the Hebrews, and they feared them. They all knew that the people were going to be coming. Okay, and I think about today, after all these great sport victories and everything, when they'd say, well, what are you going to do next? We're going to Disneyland, you know. You know. Well, after this great military victory by God over the mightiest army of that time, what do the people do? They sing a song. Let's sing a song. Well, let me get over here. In Roman numeral 2, God has Moses lift up his staff and part the waters so the people can walk through it. You know, and I wonder if they all walked through it. I would imagine, knowing that the Egyptians were on the other side. Let's get moving. In fact, that's what I think the Lord told Moses. You know, quit crying out or quit praying and get the people moving. And letter A, light for the Israelites, darkness for the Egyptians.
I know it does say that he used his hand. Stretch forth your hand.
Lift up your staff, right? I know in one.
He said, the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea.
Yeah.
So that the waters may come back over the
yeah. And then in letter B, the waters came crashing down on the Egyptian army. So we're going to go to Roman numeral 3 now. And it's Moses and all of Israel sing a song of joy to the Lord. Sing and Lord are the feelings. So in chapter 15 begins with Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea. This song is not to be confused with the Song of Moses, which is in chapter 32. Some may refer to chapter 15 as the Song of Moses chapter, but technically it is the Song of the Sea chapter. There are two songs that come out of chapter 15. One is the Song of the Sea, as the chapter is known. When you get to verse 11 of chapter 15, you will notice the other song that comes out of this chapter. Does anybody know what it is? Janie, do you have your microphone? Maria will let you use her microphone.
They keep taking it.
I think it is, I will sing unto the Lord, for he has conquered gloriously. The horse and rider fell into the sea.
That's the Song of the Sea. That is the Song of the Sea, but there is another song. And that song is Mi Kamoka. Who is like you? Mi Kamoka is part of the liturgy that is for this week's Torah portion, Beshalach. So I thought that was wonderful because when you read that, it's like, oh my gosh, I know that song. You know, we sing it. And then we also get the Song of Miriam out of this chapter. But the Song of the Sea contains 18 verses, while Miriam's song is only one verse. Exodus 15:21. The Song of the Sea is a record of events at the time when the Israelites had complete faith in God. Boy, they had complete faith in God for all of what? A few verses of the song, and then after that, well, then they turned. Go ahead, Bill.
I've been restudying sunlight, water, just a lot of the miracles of creation. And I say these miracles pale by comparison to what God has put before us. When Watson and Crick discovered the double helix of the DNA molecule, he actually leaned over his microscope and said, now I know that this has the great appearance of design, but it's so plain. There's almost an infinite number of rays of sunshine, and only one is allowed through by seawater. That's the one that carries the photosynthesis process. There's so many things that God has put there that this is boring compared to all the clues He's left us.
And you're right, and because one thing too, if you ever read like the Midrash, you'll find that even the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, they attribute something like 12 miracles just in that crossing. And then once they get to the other side, there's more miracles. But in comparison, when you start putting science and the Bible together, they just attach each other. They're all our questions are answered, and it's amazing the miracles that you see. And the only what really gets me is a lot of these scientists are Jews, and they just don't accept it. But go ahead, Colette.
Richard Feynman.
Speaking of miracles, this I think it's miraculous, as the pastors have always brought out, that it must be God's faith that we get to overcome and to actually be saved, because when you hear an atheistic so-called person talk about the reasons or their faith for not believing, in spite of all the miraculous things that are before our own eyes, what they said this week about the sin nature not being sinful, your flesh not being sinful, but it is sin.
Mm-hmm.
You have to ignore so many things that are obvious.
You're right.
That's why I don't really believe in atheists, because you have to willfully, of your own flesh, ignore all facts before you. And it's more miraculous for us to be saved than any of these other miracles.
You have to have a lot of faith to be an atheist. Go ahead, Gary.
This song that you're talking about.
The Song of the Sea?
No, well, that's a one verse thing, right?
No, the one verse is Miriam's.
Okay. Exodus 15. Then sang Moses and the people of Israel this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for He has triumphed gloriously, horse and rider thrown in the sea, yada, 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 yada. And then he talks about the captains are drowned, the depths sank to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Your glorious power dashed pieces the enemy. The greatness of your excellency rose, overthrown those against you. The blast of your nostrils, the waters gathered. And then, 9? The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide and plunder, my lust shall be satisfied upon them. that also correlates to the 5 I wills of Lucifer. And the whole song is not necessarily to Pharaoh and his people, his army, as it is to the gods of Egypt that God defeated through the plagues. The song could be sung in that manner. If you look at it from a divine council, the gods of the nations,
Right.
and,
Right.
and the gods that Egypt worshipped, that's what this song I think is talking about.
Well,
A
you know,
much deeper spiritual warfare than the physical.
well, and it's a celebration. You know, they've all been defeated. All these small g gods have now been defeated. You know, and Miriam's one verse song begins with nearly the same words as the Song of the Sea. But since Miriam's song is only one verse, even today it's more like a prayer than a song.
And then look at verse 11. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods?
Thank you. Yeah, Mika Mocha. Yeah. Yep.
That's what this battle is about. The spiritual war between the God of gods and the rebellious gods.
Right. Right. Go ahead, Sharon.
I read that since the creation, there have been 10 songs, and this is one of them.
Yep.
I don't know if they were counting the song in Revelation, the song.
That is number 10.
That is number 10.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, I think that's really interesting.
Yes.
I'd like to do a study on the 10 songs someday.
Amen.
I think it'd be.
That would be. You know, the Song of the Sea is known for being written in ancient Hebrew language because it is considered to be written in a style that is much older than the rest of Exodus. You know, there are some scholars that believe that it's the oldest surviving text to describe Exodus. Then there are those who say that it was deliberately written that way. Either way, it's obviously very old and a clear example of Hebrew in its earliest stages. So that, you know, being written like that, it's you know, it's a special song. And one thing about the Song of the Sea, it's always sung. Unlike Miriam's, which is mostly, even to this day, is just mostly a prayer. So in verses 1 to 10 is a celebration of God's victory over Egypt and the Egyptians. Verses 11-13 is clear that the other deities cannot compare to the one true God. And then in verses 14 to 16, it tells of how the exodus from Egypt was a strong effect on the other nations. So did the nations know about this? Oh, absolutely. Verses 17 and 18 tells of God's continuing reign and is prophetic in that God will reign forever and ever. Okay, let's get back to our fill-ins. Roman numeral 3, letter A, Shirat Hayam, Song of the Sea. And letter B, a celebration of God's victory over Egypt. Then in letter C, no other God compares to the God of Israel. Amen. Absolutely. Okay. So now after Miriam's song, we get to verse 22-27, which tells of the Israelites' journey to Sinai. Having spent all their lives in Egypt, the Israelites were not prepared for the hardships of life in the barren wilderness area. Their happy days of their joyous feelings of faith, and then they confidently showed while singing their song of victory at the reed seat, it didn't last long. I think earlier, even Kathleen said it, 3 days. Because that's all it took. 3 days of traveling. And as they traveled, they became thirsty, and they discovered that the only water available to them was undrinkable, and they complained bitterly. So, and that's in 22 to 24. Well, in Roman numeral 4, God will now start teaching the people his ways to be obedient to Torah. You might say, well, Torah? Well, anything that God is teaching them, it's Torah. It all is a tribute to Torah. Okay, so the Israelites are now complaining 3 days later. It says in verse 26 and 27, 227, there he made for them a statute and regulation, and there he tested them. 26, and he said, if you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and listen to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians. And I, the Lord, I am your healer. In 27, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and they camped there besides the water. Did somebody have something to say? Okay. Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
It's just about the aspect of the tree, actually.
Uh-huh.
Tomorrow is New Year's of the trees, and this parish will have to coincide with that. But, you know, all the patterns that go with the trees and all of that kind of stuff. When you look at this, you realize people complain like, God, where are you?
Right.
You know, what are you going to do for us? Well, he put the sun on the tree. And through being on the tree and coming off the tree and being resurrected, then all the bitterness of the world basically has been made sweet. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we don't tie it here necessarily, but right. It is there.
Yeah. You know, there was one trip, I don't know if you're part of that trip to Israel. When we were there, we went to was it elementary school or a junior high? Middle school. Went to a middle school, and we planted trees. And every time when we get to the new year of the tree, was like you said, it's tomorrow. It always reminds me of my trip there, and we planted trees, and you know, I could imagine, because that had to be what, 15 years ago or something like that, and how big those trees are now, you know. So, but it was wonderful. What was the name of it? Beit Shemesh. But it was, you know, it was wonderful because they welcomed us in, and in fact, we even danced with them, and we did the horror with them and everything. So it was wonderful. In fact, that's where Peggy. There was one of the kids there that was trying to learn to speak Spanish. So he was amazed that he finally found somebody that spoke Spanish, you know. And she asked him, "Well, how are you learning Spanish?" He says, "I watched novelas on TV." So that was the way he was learning it. So, but it was just a wonderful time that we had there. But that's every year during the New Year's of the trees is. It always reminds me of our time there in Israel, and you know. But here, I better move on. Whose is that? Okay, well. Okay, so God had to teach the people that his presence among them did not mean that they would be free of the problems of daily living. They were still going to have some problems. Whatever the case, if they lived each day in obedience to him, he would help them survive in the desert, even while facing potential hardship and disease. He could teach them all the skills of living in the wilderness, so that undrinkable water could be made drinkable. Or he could guide their journeys so that they came to a place where good water was available. That was in 25:27. So in Exodus chapter 16, the children of Israel were out of Egypt and in the wilderness of Sin, in between Sinai and Elam. The correct pronunciation, I know you might have it there, the wilderness of Sin, but it's not pronounced sin. It's pronounced Seen, Seen. So letter A, the wilderness of sin, pronounced Seen, and it means thorn. And from here we also get the word Sinai, and Sinai means thorny. So yeah. So they quickly forgot the mercies that God had shown them in the hands of Pharaoh, and were now complaining to Moses and Aaron. So now it's not only Moses that they're complaining to, they also added in Aaron. So they even, and I think they already got beyond the mixed multitude, so they even exaggerated that it was much better in Egypt, where they ate meat and bread freely in comfort. They were slaves and they ate in comfort. So the Lord heard the Israelites grumbling and offered quail in the evening and manna in the morning to them. However, he provided this on one condition, that they only gather their portions every day except for the Sabbath. You know, he's giving them all these instructions, and they all listen to him, right? Wrong. You know, which was supposed to be a day, the Sabbath is a day of rest. Moreover, it was to be gathered early in the morning before the scorching sun could melt it or destroy it. So in letter B, the people complained. This will be common throughout the 40 years of traveling in the wilderness. Then in letter C, manna fell from heaven. The people were instructed to gather it in the morning. You know, God, go ahead, Maria.
Before I forget, I wanted to throw this out.
Uh-huh.
That people really held grudges in those days, like the Amalekites hating Israel.
Yep.
Well, when Alexander conquered Egypt, an envoy was sent to Alexander, and they put a petition saying they wanted all that money back that the Jews stole from them when they left Egypt. And the rabbis came and they told Alexander, we were there, but and we worked for them, but we didn't get our money. And they had a nice court fight, and Alexander ruled against the Egyptians. But they were still wanting their money back.
Yeah, I never read that, but I could see something like that going on. One thing I wanted to point out here is the Amalekites. Talking about the Amalekites now. The Amalekites were in the southern region of, would say, like of Israel today. They were up here. The Amalekites were not down here in the Sinai Peninsula, because if they had been down in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, that was Egyptian territory, Pharaoh wouldn't like it. He would have went after them and destroyed them. Get out. So that's why when they're going across, I tell you that the wilderness, this wilderness path, that's why the Amalekites would come down and they would attack the stragglers. Okay, so and we're going to read a little bit about, you know, they finally, after everything is done, they're instructed to go after and defeat the Amalekites. But God did not give specific instruction on whether they should gather much or little. The quantity was just supposed to be sufficient for a day's fill when we're talking about the manna. Exodus chapter 16 tells us, and Moses instructed them to get rid of any of it before the morning, before morning or before the sun would come out. I mean, cook it, get it all ready, and then on the sixth day, get a double portion ready. So, but the people still did not listen. Some of them kept the food until the morning or the afternoon, and it was filled with worms and a terrible stench. Okay. The portion that was kept until the Sabbath day, however, was still fresh. Another miracle. The Lord kept it fresh so the people did not have to gather food on the day that he intended them to rest, on the Shabbat. Nevertheless, some of the Israelites still had trouble following God's instructions. Yep, they still do. They gathered more manna on the Sabbath day despite his directives. God then commanded Moses to keep a 2-quart jar of manna so future generations would remember what God offered them. Since it tasted like wafers made with honey, it kept reminding the Israelites of how the promised land would be like every day for the 40 years that they ate it. And oh my gosh, I mean, sometimes you think about it. If they did have the Ark of the Covenant and opened it up and they pulled the manna out, and I would imagine it would taste like it just fell from heaven, you know. But Exodus chapter 17 begins with the Israelites exiting the place known as the wilderness of Sin. They traveled across the land as the Lord had instructed them, but the people began complaining of their situation again with Moses. Maria, were you going to say something?
I just wanted, if you would clarify, is this where the Jews get the command not to travel on the Sabbath, where it says, remain every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day.
Mm-hmm. I don't think this is where they got it initially. It was always in place. Initially,
traveling on the Sabbath?
Oh, the traveling.
I got him to talk.
One of the commandments sets up Sabbath lines, borders. So, Sabbath day journey. So that's where that commandment comes from.
Is that why they have so many synagogues in Jerusalem, so that they don't have to travel too much?
Well, I'm not sure about that, because the distance was about a quarter of a mile, I believe, and it was a small city.
3,000 feet.
In Yeshua's day, there was 460 synagogues in the city limits of Jerusalem. So it was probably caused by splits. More.
Yeah, Orthodox Jews.
The what?
And you said that there were 400 synagogues in Jerusalem.
460, yeah. Plus the temple.
Yeah. So the people of Israel groaned about being in the desert and asked Moses for some water while they were camped at Rephidim. They were thirsty and complained about dying of dehydration from the heat. They again tested the Lord and asked Moses why he brought them out to the desert to die. The Lord told Moses to strike a rock by Horeb after gathering the elders of Israel. As soon as he did this, water for the people to drink gushed out. And as Gary said earlier, there is a rock that is, they show how it's just cut in half and all the way down the hill or the mountain. You could tell that water had flowed down that area. Go ahead, Maria. No buts, Maria.
When God told him this, didn't he tell him to leave the people, go 5 miles, and then strike the rock? Because the people were camped in one place and the rock was in another place, 5 miles away.
Well, I know the rock was much higher than the plain below.
Yeah, the rock, they were in Rephidim, I think. And God told him, leave the people, take some elders, go to Horeb, and I'll be waiting there for you beside the rock, and then you will strike the rock, and that's 5 miles.
5 mile stretch?
Yeah.
I didn't.
He didn't just walk there in front of the people. He
I
left the
didn't think
people.
that. Yeah, absolutely. But I didn't know. I didn't think he went 5 miles. You have anything to add, Gary?
At the top of this major hill where the rock was split, as you said, coming down, all of the rocks were worn smooth because of the constant water, and it flowed down to a low level basin where it formed a small lake.
Right.
And
Right.
it just filled up from there. So how far away from the camp it was, who knows?
Yeah.
5 miles is a long way to carry water.
Yeah.
Vince?
Okay, I have Bonnie. Bonnie would like to share something. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Everything that everybody is talking about, I just saw in a documentary, I think it's on Amazon Prime, where these two guys were looking for the real Mount Sinai.
Right.
And everything that they're talking about is in there. That rock is actually split, and there's like a tree that is grown right in the middle of it.
Well, you know what? And if you saw it on the internet, it has to be true.
Yeah. I'm just saying.
Wasn't there a commercial like that? Go ahead, Sharon.
Just a question, would this be the same rock that followed them throughout their 40 years?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, that's a different rock. Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
One thing about the camp, though, we know the camp was 12 miles wide when they were set up in the wilderness. So being 5 miles away, it's still in the camp, actually.
Yeah. I didn't think about that. You're right. See, that's why we have all these people here. Okay, while the Israelites were camped at Rephidim, Amalek's army attacked them. Moses told Joshua to choose some men to fight against the armies of Amalek, and he would stand upon a hill while holding the staff of God in his hand. Joshua obeyed Moses' command. So he gets an army together of men, and he goes out to attack Amalek. As soon as Joshua was fighting against Amalek, Moses and Aaron and a man named Hur went to the top of the hill. When Moses raised his hands, the Israelites would be on the winning end of the battle. When his arms became tired and when he lowered his hands, Amalek would start winning. So they had to come up with a great idea. Moses needed to keep his hands up to ensure that the people of Israel would win the fight. So Moses' arms grew weary and he needed rest. However, he still could not put his hands down. Hur and Aaron took a rock and set it under him so he could sit. It's funny when you read the Midrash. The Midrash said he would not sit on a cushion. Where'd you get the idea that they had to? But so he would not sit on a cushion because he wanted to sit on the rock because that made him feel like he was part of the battle. but so the two men stood on both sides of Moses, and they held his hands up for the rest of the time until sunset. Joshua's army won against Amalek. The Lord instructed Moses to write it on a scroll, since he was going to completely blot out Amalek from the map. Moses made an altar on that place and named it, "The Lord is my banner." Go ahead, Tila.
I was going to say this is for me, this is a spiritual principle as far as, when our brothers and sisters are very weak in what's going on. And there's been many times where we quote that story and say, "I will hold up your arms. I know you're weary and you're tired." Amen. And so many people have been encouraged by repeating this story. Amen. Because God does win.
Amen. And and we don't. The person doesn't necessarily have to be in our congregation. Right. We have a gal. Her name is Jenny Sloan. Yes. And nobody here. None of us know her, but we've been praying for her. And when we get the praise reports back, oh my gosh, she is a miracle. A woman that was supposed to be dead, that the doctors said she would not even survive. 24 hours. Yeah. Well, now she's getting her speech back. She's starting to write, and praise God. And it's like you said, spiritually, we're holding her up. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Amen. So the last fill-in is in letter D. The Israelites defeat the Amalekites. The Israelites defeat the Amalekites. B was the people complain, and this will be common throughout the 40 years of traveling in the wilderness. In letter C, manna fell from heaven. The people were instructed to gather it in the morning. And that is our Torah study for today.